Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea sees a jump in the number of COVID-19 infections Wednesday with over 400,000 cases. Authorities are mulling over easing the current social distancing cap to 10 people and allowing businesses to operate until midnight. Peace talks between Russia and Ukraine appear to deliver the first tentative signs of progress on Tuesday, as Russia said it would significantly scale back its military activity around Kyiv and northern Ukraine. And South Korea signaled that it may take stern measures against North Korea if the regime conducts more ICBM tests. Seoul's defense ministry says these measures could include the local deployment of more U.S. strategic military assets.
Hello and welcome to this Wednesday edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Mark Broom. Thanks for being with us.
And I'm Kim Mo-gyan. It's 8 a.m. in Seoul, Korea on March 30th. And over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on issues facing Korea and the world.
We start, though, with the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea. The country is forecast to see more than 400,000 new cases on Wednesday. That is a rather significant jump from the previous day's tally.
However, the country is seeing a gradual decline in infections, prompting authorities to consider easing the current social distancing rules. For more, our reporter Chim Min-jung is here in the studio with us. Good morning, Min-jung.
Good morning.
So what are we expecting for today? How many cases?
Well, we're seeing an increase in infections as usual as we get to the middle of the week. We will see cases in the 400,000s today, as from midnight to 9 p.m. Tuesday, South Korea saw over 414,000 infections. It's a jump of around 80,000 from the previous day. The figure has been increasing from the start of the week, but if you compare the tally to the same time last week, the number is down by around 61,000 cases. As authorities have said, it seems the country has entered the downward slope of the Omicron wave. A little more than half of the infections were confirmed in the capital region, with Gyeonggi-do province reporting the most with 116,000 cases and Seoul posting 80,000 cases.
And Min-jung, as Mo-gyan alluded to, South Korea is likely to revise its social distancing measures. Announcement expected on that on Friday and for them to take effect from next week. Do we know what we might be able to expect?
Well, officials appear to be considering relaxing the current social distancing measures. Currently, gatherings of up to 8 people are allowed and most businesses must close by 11 p.m. And this is set to last until this Sunday. So starting next week, new measures will be in place. The changes are likely to include expanding the social gathering cap to 10 people, and they're also likely to extend business hours to midnight. Authorities have said that now is the time to encourage people to make voluntary efforts rather than imposing strict measures. And they added that imposing strict restrictions is no longer effective at this point, given that the Omicron variant is much more transmissible than the Delta variant. They also said that imposing tougher measures is unnecessary when considering Omicron's low fertility rate, currently at less than 1%. Officials, though, are well aware that cases may spike if restrictions are all eased at once. And to avoid this, they reiterated that they have been gradually easing restrictions. The country's Pandemic Recovery Committee will meet on Thursday to discuss revisions, and authorities are scheduled to announce the new measures on Friday.
Now, Min-jung, these health authorities have also expanded the way COVID-19 patients recovering at home could be treated. Tell us more on that.
Right, Mo-gyan, now people with COVID-19 have more access to face-to-face treatment. Starting today, local clinics and hospitals, including clinics that practice Korean traditional medicine, can submit applications if they wish to treat COVID patients face-to-face. The treatment of outpatients has been mainly handled by medical centers specializing in respiratory diseases. But now, this will be expanded to other hospitals and clinics as well. Just like when people catch a cold, those infected with COVID-19 who wish to visit clinics and hospitals can see a doctor face-to-face after making a reservation. And this is allowed even if they are under quarantine. However, people must take note that any medication they need must be picked up by another person who doesn't have COVID-19. To prevent infections at clinics and hospitals, officials say they will have separate diagnosis times and areas for COVID patients.
And before we let you go, South Korea's health authorities are pretty concerned about the rising infection rate among older people here.
That's right, Mark. Currently, 1 in 5 infections are in people aged 60 and above. Last month, these seniors accounted for around 10% of the infections, but now the figure has increased close to 20%. Health authorities pointed out that seniors are becoming more vulnerable to infections because more than 3 months have passed since most of them got their booster shots, also meaning that the shot is not as effective in preventing infection as it used to be. Despite the waning efficacy, however, authorities have once again advised seniors who have gotten their boosters to get inoculated as soon as possible, saying that it's still 97% effective against developing severe symptoms.
So getting booster shots, it's even more important for people in the elderly and vulnerable age group. Thank you so much for your report, Min-jung. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So with around 1 out of 5 people in South Korea having now been infected with the Omicron variant of COVID-19, there are countless households where all family members have the virus and are recovering at home.
However, often the biggest challenge these families face is that with everyone quarantined, who can pick up their prescription medicine from their local pharmacy. Yoon reports.
Authorities have been tweaking their antivirus measures to effectively curb the spread of COVID-19. To stop the surge of Omicron, they've introduced at-home recovery measures. But many questions have popped up as more and more of the population become infected with the virus, especially in households where all family members have been infected. In these situations, the most common question is whether an infected person can pick up their own prescription medicine. The answer is no, because the rule of thumb is that only those that aren't infected can do so. But what if there isn't anybody who can pick up the medication? Especially in cases when all family members are infected, or the only ones not infected are young children. To that, authorities said prescription drugs can be delivered to the doorstep of those recovering from home. But each local government will have their own methods in place. Some regions have designated agencies to deliver medication from pharmacies, while other regions have set aside staff from medical clinics to deliver the medication themselves. With methods differing depending on location, those recovering at home can call up their nearest hospital or pharmacy for information on how they can receive their medication. Another important question is who pays for the medicine. Those that have tested positive through a rapid antigen test done at hospitals or clinics or a PCR test will not have to pay for the medicine. There have been cases where some pharmacies unfamiliar with the cost processing procedure have charged people who have been confirmed with the virus. But in this situation, people can ask for a full refund. Another potential problem is when parents or essential caregivers have been infected but not their children. If their children report suspected symptoms, though, can they go to a hospital or clinic alone and receive medical examination or treatment? The short answer is no. Parents can accompany their child to the hospital using their own car or just by walking there. But the parent must inform the hospital they're visiting that they've been infected and abide by all virus prevention measures, including wearing a KF94 mask at all times and returning straight home after the medical checkup. Yoon, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. South Korea's main stock market, the benchmark Kospi, has been performing moderately well in recent weeks, but it's not really setting the world on fire. It's fair to say the Kospi has been ranging between the 2,700 to 2,800 mark for a fair amount of time, but most Korean stocks are expected to do reasonably well in 2022, with many analysts saying they expect tech stocks to lead the way.
However, geopolitical tensions regarding the war in Ukraine, the international response to that conflict, as well as the tepid economic situation, are generally seen as reasons for less foreign investment than usual. Despite that, local buying remains strong and reasonably consistent. For more, we connect to Jimmy Oh, Associate Professor of Finance at Hanyang University, who is currently on sabbatical at the University of Illinois. Professor, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be on the program. Hi.
So firstly, can you explain why foreign investors are generally opting against investing in Korean stocks at the current time?
Sure. So the starting point to that answering that question has to be the inflation. So now the Federal Reserve is expected to increase interest rate at pretty much every FOMC meeting. So added to that is the fact that the war in Ukraine has been adding a layer of additional uncertainty, both of which have had the crucial effect of weakening South Korea's exchange rate against the dollar. And from a foreign investor's point of view, even if you gain 5%, say, from KOSPI, if the exchange rate depreciates by another 5%, then that's no use. So generally, this is the trend that when we see as the dollar strengthens and when foreign investors flock back towards the US in response to rising interest rate environment. And foreign investors are, in addition, seeing Korea as particularly vulnerable to inflation and supply chain issues compared to other countries in the region as well.
Now, local investors don't seem to be that put off by all these external uncertainties as well as the internal issues facing Korea, as you touched upon, inflation. Why is it that Koreans are generally still jumping into the stock market here compared to foreign investors who are generally staying on the sidelines?
So there are a few issues related to that. The first textbook part of the answer is for every seller, there has to be a buyer. So even if foreigners wanted to sell, someone has to be taking on those orders. And Korean individual investors are known to be very much home biased. I mean, in recent years, more people have been warming towards investing in foreign stocks through various ETFs and other investments. But still, the bulk of investment is within the Korean market. And the exchange rate issue that I talked about is pretty much irrelevant to individual investors residing in Korea, earning income in Korean won as well. So that's another factor. And the last part of the answer to that would be that retail investors tend to be more using a lot more of a rule of thumb, say, how much the stocks have fallen, whether we hit the bottom. This sort of sentiment-based trading is quite rampant among the so-called Kemi investors in Korea. And that's the reason why we're seeing a very contrasting pattern between foreign investors versus retail individual investors here in Korea.
Now, Professor, so which South Korean stocks do you expect to outperform the rest of the field this year? And which ones, well, no financial advice, of course, but would you avoid for the time being?
So I wish I knew the answer to that question clearly, being an investor myself, obviously. But I think inflation and reopening would be the key to that. So, for example, oil refinery related business, they always do strongly because of strong margins during an inflationary phase. Consumer staples, anything that has inelastic demand with respect to price increases, you still have to eat. You still have to buy diapers. So that sort of industries generally tend to buck up well when prices rise at a faster pace. And the stocks that I would probably avoid, without going too much into detail, would be the sort of COVID and pandemic specialist stocks. So, for example, in US, Peloton, the home sports sort of stocks, they have been doing quite poorly in response to all these reopenings, people going back to the gym outdoors. Other stuff, anything that's related to supply chain issues like automotives and various mechanical equipment industry, they will be very sensitive to inflation and reopening and supply chain related issues.
All right. We have experienced some technical difficulties, but anyhow, Professor Oh, thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
South Korea has signaled that it may take stern measures against North Korea if the regime conducts more ICBM tests. These could include the deployment of more U.S. strategic military assets on the peninsula. And Seoul's defense ministry also concluded Tuesday that the missile North Korea launched last week was not a new ICBM, as the regime continues to claim. Peunji reports.
During a closed-door parliamentary session on Tuesday, South Korea's defense ministry reportedly said Seoul and Washington plan to respond using U.S. strategic military assets if the North launches another ICBM. This means that B-52H long-range heavy bombers or B-1B strategic bombers could be deployed on the Korean peninsula. The ministry also provided evidence that the North's missile launch last Thursday was not the Hwasong-17, like the regime claimed. The ministry said it was in fact the Hwasong-15, a model that's older and slightly smaller. First in its report, the ministry said the flight characteristics of the missile, including its speed and engine burn time, indicate that it was a Hwasong-15. And although it may have looked like a Hwasong-17 because it flew longer and higher than the Hwasong-15 launched in 2017, the ministry explained that a detailed analysis shows these data were actually similar to the older model. Second, it said the shadow seen in the video released by the North showing leader Kim Jong-un suggests it was filmed in the morning, sometime between 8 and 10 a.m. But the missile was fired at around 2:30 in the afternoon. Third, the weather. The Sunan area was very cloudy at the time of the launch on March 24th. But in the video released by the North, the sky is perfectly clear. Fourth, the Hwasong-17 is supposed to have 4 nozzles. This requires a much more complicated technology than the Hwasong-15, which has 2 nozzles. The defense ministry noted that just 8 days earlier, the North had attempted to launch a Hwasong-17 that failed and said it wouldn't have had enough time to find out what went wrong. The defense ministry explained that the North probably disguised the launch to send Project Success to its citizens because it's likely that people in Pyongyang saw the missile a week earlier blow up in the air. During the Tuesday's parliamentary session, one congressman said debris of the North's failed Hwasong-17 launch affected civilians in Pyongyang. Ha Tae-kyung of the main opposition party told reporters on Tuesday that debris of the missile rained over the North's capital city, and the explosion was visible to the naked eye. He said although it's unclear if there were any human casualties, it definitely caused some damage. Peunji, Arirang News.
The leaders of the U.S. and Singapore have condemned North Korea's latest missile launches, urging the regime to return to dialogue. Speaking to reporters following a meeting at the White House Tuesday, President Biden and his Singapore counterpart said they shared concerns about North Korea's provocations. They described the launches as clear violations of UN Security Council resolutions. They also underscored the importance of preserving stability in the Indo-Pacific region.
South Korea's President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol held phone talks Tuesday with Ukraine's president about ways to help Ukraine during its time of need. Also, as he prepares to take office in May, Yoon's transition committee has also revealed the team members that will soon fly to the United States for a whole slew of talks with American officials. Kim Da-mi tells us more.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol spoke on the phone with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at 5 p.m. on Tuesday local time, their first phone call since Yoon was elected. Yoon's office released no immediate details, saying it wouldn't be appropriate with Ukraine currently in a state of war. But it's expected that Zelensky asked the incoming Yoon administration for support against Russia, possibly a specific support plan he's hoping for from Seoul. Yoon has pledged support for Ukraine since he was a presidential candidate, including when he met with the Ukrainian ambassador to South Korea, Dmytro Ponomarenko, earlier this month. Also on Tuesday, Yoon's office finalized the president-elect's delegation to the U.S., who are set to head to Washington early next month for policy consultations with the U.S. government, congressional officials, and experts on the bilateral alliance and security issues.
We will do our best to restore the South Korea-U.S. alliance and maintain our security posture in the face of North Korea's breaking of its moratorium, meaning its nuclear and missile threats.
Headed by Representative Park Jin of Yoon's People Power Party, the 7-member delegation includes a former Vice Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yong, also Chung Jae-ho, a professor of political science and international relations at Seoul National University, Park Cheol-hee, a professor of SNU Graduate School of International Studies, Pyo Se-woo, former defense attaché at the South Korean Embassy in Washington, Yeon Won-ho, a researcher at the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, and Kang In-sun, the president-elect's spokesperson for the foreign press. Also the same day, the Asahi Shimbun reported that the president-elect has decided to dispatch a policy council to Japan, composed of lawmakers and Japan experts around the time Yoon takes office on May 10th. The decision reportedly came out of Yoon's meeting on Monday with the Japanese ambassador to Seoul, Koichi Aiboshi. The group will reportedly be looking to sit down for talks with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to discuss Seoul-Tokyo relations and foreign policy and security issues. Yoon's transition committee, however, denied the report about Japan, saying they're still working on delegations to other countries. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for global insight. North Korea last week claimed to have tested a new and improved intercontinental ballistic missile, raising alarm in South Korea, the United States, and around the world. Since then, analysts have expressed doubt over whether the projectile was really the regime's latest model. But it's clear that North Korea does remain, as ever, a threat to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in the region as well. Now, all eyes are on the incoming Yoon Suk-yeol administration and how its North Korea policy will shape up after it takes office in May. We discussed this today with Bruce W. Bennett, adjunct defense researcher at the RAND Corporation and author of various books, including Preparing for the Possibility of a North Korean Collapse. We also connect with Kim Young-jun, professor of Korea National Defense University and member of South Korea's National Security Advisory Board to the president. Very warm welcome to you both. And, well, beginning with you, Dr. Bennett, joining us from California. Now, North Korea last week claimed to have tested a new intercontinental ballistic missile, the Hwasong-17, last week. But analysts in Seoul and Washington are now saying that it may have actually been an older model, the Hwasong-15. Are you surprised by this possible exaggeration by the North? And what difference would it make in terms of threat and capability?
Oh, not at all surprised. North Korea does a lot of deception in their activities. I think we have to recognize that they had some missile that failed the previous week on the 16th of March, and they'd had two previous launches that the U.S. and the South Korean government said had been parts, at least, of the Hwasong-17. What we don't know is were those previous tests parts, or were they actual failures as well? For all we know, at this stage, we could have had 3 Hwasong-17 failures. Kim wasn't going to continue with even one failure that he couldn't explain. So I think at this stage, we've got to assume that Kim went with the best he had available, which was the Hwasong-15. But that means a much lower threat in terms of what we would potentially be facing from North Korea. The Hwasong-15 probably can't quite reach to San Francisco with a nuclear weapon. The Hwasong-17 probably can reach to most of the U.S. if it ever works.
Right, well, very concerning, regardless of its, progress on Hwasong-17. And, well, its provocation was largely expected as the new South Korean administration will take office next month. In May, but almost next month. But in April, though, Professor Kim, there are perhaps more provocations coming from North Korea, as April is a very key, important month for the ruling regime, which is going to mark the 110th birthday of its founder, Kim Il-sung. Should we then expect to see something bigger? I mean, what are you expecting to see?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to see Dr. Bennett as well. Sure, it seems that North Korea already decided its policy towards South Korea and the U.S. for the next 5 years under this new Cold War circumstances like the U.S.-China competition and the Russian-Ukraine war, North Korea thought that it would be difficult for productive negotiation with the U.S. for a while. And more importantly, China and Russia will not join the U.S. lead UN sanction. So North Korea will continue to develop its nuclear missile capability during this time, using this opportunity. So North Korea's decision for going nuclear and missile is also target its domestic audience because they already suffer from the economic and COVID-19 situation. So North Korea need it. So I think it's, in April, we are able to expect something bigger provocation from the North Korea.
And Professor Kim, with South Korea's Conservative President-elect Yoon coming into office in May, do you think North Korea is going to scale up its provocations then and possibly even resume nuclear testing? That's you, Professor Kim.
All right. Yeah. So I think that there is a high possibility about the nuclear test. Why not? The Yoon administration already showed a strong posture against North Korea and no false action without actual denuclearization process of the North Korea. So and North Korea emphasized the reaction on the ROK U.S.-Japan relation, but the Yoon administration emphasized on ROK U.S.-Japan alliance and a strong ROK U.S. military exercise, including FTX. So as well as also additional mention about the THAAD deployment as well. So North Korea will be able to do more strong action, including nuclear tests, possibly in this year as well.
And Dr. Bennett, there are growing concerns that the likes of China, Russia and North Korea are going to work together and collaborate to weaken America, and that Pyongyang testing its ICBMs might not necessarily be a bad thing for Moscow and Beijing. What are your views on this?
Oh, I would take a step back and say, I don't think it's an issue of going to. I think it is an issue of has been. I think they've been working together in many ways. Where did North Korea get all of the technology that it's using for these missiles? I think at least some of it probably has come from Russian scientists, if not the Russian government. Maybe some from China as well. So they are working together, they're supporting each other. North Korea justifies Russia in his invasion of the Ukraine. This is an interesting relationship and a difficult justification. I think they will continue to do so. So what do we expect from North Korea as a result? As Professor Kim has said, I think we can expect within the next short period of time, perhaps in the next weeks, another ICBM test. They do have to, now that they've been told that they didn't succeed with the Hwasong 17, they probably will want to demonstrate that. But I think a nuclear test is also coming. They've got to yet demonstrate a warhead that can go on the Hwasong 17 and actually re-enter the atmosphere. And at this stage, they don't seem to have demonstrated that. And that's something which then they have to have an appropriate warhead that they have tested and make sure it would work.
Professor Kim, it's quite clear that the new Yoon administration is not going to be making the big, extravagant, very generous gestures to win over North Korea as outgoing President Moon did in his attempts to build Korean peace. What do you think is going to be the new president's priority, and what kind of creative solutions do you think the administration could bring to the table?
Right. At this moment, it seems very difficult to find a magic solution to bring North Korea to a negotiation table and creative methodology to solve this kind of problem. North Korea will not join without concrete suggestion of the U.S. And North Korea already said it's so far, like the destruction of Yongbyon nuclear complex in Hanoi, but it was failed. So we will see North Korea provocation like the second Cheonan sinking incident or second Yeonpyeong Island attack, even including the 2017 war scenario under the Trump administration due to North Korea-U.S. tension increase. So at the moment, to be honest, it is very difficult to find creative methodology by the Yoon administration.
Well, Dr. Bennett, it seems that Seoul and Washington are going to have to try and do something to learn from previous experiences. past President Barack Obama's strategic patience was heavily criticised for not working, and Donald Trump's bromance approach wasn't exactly successful either. So then, what should South Korea and the United States do in order to adapt their North Korea policy?
Well, I think this is a case where we need a mixed policy. Policy one part would be to try to address the impasse on negotiation. Why wait for North Korea to come to the negotiating table? Why don't we put a proposal out in the international community? Say this is what we're prepared to do, and North Korea, you can choose it or you cannot. But why don't we show initiative that we are not hostile, that we are prepared to deal with North Korea, and show our unity in working South Korea and the United States together. Meanwhile, we need a more positive response to North Korea. North Korea has now done so far this year 15 missiles that they've launched. Why aren't we deterring that? We have plenty of power to deter it, but we haven't been successful. The answer is we haven't found the right measures, because deterrence is all about convincing an adversary that the cost will be greater than the advantage it has to gain. I think we keep forgetting the cost of information. Kim is absolutely terrified by outside information. He called it a cancer, a vicious cancer that was corrupting the morals of his younger generation. Well, fine, let's use some outside information. Let's tell him you do another launch and you are going to face 500,000 USB drives in Pyongyang carrying K-pop and dramas and so forth. Let's give him a cost that he has to pay.
Professor Kim, South Korea and the United States are expected to strengthen their bilateral alliance under the Yoon administration. And while the president-elect has mentioned placing additional anti-missile defense systems in the country, do you think the North's recent ICBM provocation really strengthens the case for this?
Yeah, sure. The strong action will lead to a strong reaction. Definitely, North Korean provocation will lead to the reaction of the Yoon's of the administration, and also they have to keep their promise in strengthening U.S. extended deterrence and also additional anti-missile defense system against the North Korea provocation. And also they have to show what is different from the Moon Jae-in's peace process. So absolutely, South Korea will like to strengthen their alliance with the U.S., possibly with Japan as well. So I think it's a North Korea provocation is not good for the Yoon's administration peace initiative. And I really support Dr. Bennett's suggestion. We have to try something, K-pop or some like K culture into North Korean society in waking up the North Korean young generation. So we need to have some kind of discussion about it with the U.S.
And Dr. Bennett, well, it seems now that South Koreans, the members of the public, are now perceiving a greater sense of threat from China and really prioritizing a value-based cooperation with the US rather than just focusing on North Korea issues. What do you make of this change, and what do you hope to see from South Korea's incoming administration in its overall foreign policy?
Well, I think you have to step back and say it's not just South Koreans who are recognizing a Chinese threat. It's only been a little over a year that Americans have been seriously recognizing a Chinese threat. So this is a case where both of our countries are becoming aware that China poses a long-term and significant threat to our best interests. And we need to start working together on dealing with this. But South Korea faces a much more difficult problem with its economy so dependent upon exports and imports from China. So this is a case where the U.S. has got to be a little patient. We've got to be prepared to work with South Korea. But things like the THAAD missile defense system, which President-elect Yoon has spoken of, that would really be very effective, not only against North Korean missiles, but also against Chinese. So we have to look for ways of strengthening the defense in South Korea so that it is a defense which covers all of the ranges of threats that could be posed. And that raises a very interesting set of new issues, including the North Korean nuclear threat. It's been decades since we've worried about nuclear warfighting, but as the ancient Roman general said, if you want peace, prepare for war. If you're ready and you're powerful enough, no one's going to attack you. So we need to start doing those preparations so that we deter both North Korea and China.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time here, so this is where we'll have to wrap up this interview. And that was Bruce W. Bennett at the RAND Corporation and Kim Young-jun, Professor of Korea National Defense University. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Russia claims it's cutting back on military activity near Ukraine's capital in a city in northern Ukraine. This announcement coming on Tuesday after delegations from Russia and Ukraine held talks in Turkey. U.S. officials say they believe Russia is attempting to reposition its forces ahead of a major offensive on other parts of Ukraine, adding that, quote, no one should be fooled by Moscow's claim of toning down its assault. Ji-young reports.
Peace talks between Russia and Ukraine are gaining momentum as Russia promised to scale back its military presence in Ukraine's capital. Delegations from Russia and Ukraine held their first direct talks in more than 2 weeks in Istanbul on Tuesday, and they said some progress was made during discussions. The Russian defense minister said Moscow would reduce military operations near the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv and the northern city of Chernihiv to increase the trust in the talks.
The Russian Defense Ministry, in order to increase mutual trust and create the necessary conditions for further negotiations and achieving the ultimate goal of agreeing and signing the above-mentioned treaty, made a decision to radically, by a large margin, reduce military activity in the Kyiv and Chernihiv regions.
However, U.S. officials were skeptical of Russia's announcement, with the White House saying, we're not going to take their word for it.
We believe any movement of forces from around Kyiv is a redeployment and not a withdrawal, and the world should be prepared for a major offensive against other areas of Ukraine. Everyone should expect that we're going to continue to see attacks across Ukraine.
Despite the talks, Russian shelling continues. Moscow forces struck the office of the regional military governor in the southern Ukrainian port city of Mykolaiv. Local authorities said a Russian rocket killed at least 12 people and injured at least 33, with the building half demolished. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Japan's education authorities have revealed the contents of new textbooks to be used by Japanese school students in 2023. Expressions that show the coercive nature of Tokyo's atrocities against Koreans during World War II have been omitted. In response, the South Korean government has lodged a strong complaint, accusing the Japanese government of trying to distort history. Kim Hyo-sun with more.
The controversy over history textbooks has again risen to the surface with Tokyo's announcement of the screening results of the new reading materials to be provided to Japanese students. In the new textbooks to be used by second and third grade high school students from next year, the word forced has been deleted when referring to the Korean people who were forced into hard labor during World War II at Japanese mines and industrial facilities. Related segments have been modified to say mobilization or conscription instead of forced. In addition, many of the books approved by Japan's Education Ministry have omitted the expression wartime comfort women when describing the Korean women sexually enslaved by Japan's Imperial Army. Some of the books have also downplayed related historical facts. However, when it comes to Dokdo, Korean islets in the East Sea, the textbooks reiterate Japan's false territorial claims over them and accuses South Korea of occupying Dokdo in an illegal manner. Following the announcement, South Korea expressed its deep regret. Seoul's foreign ministry urged Tokyo to provide students with proper history education based on, quote, the spirit of apology that some of Japan's past leaders showed regarding Japan's wartime atrocities. The ministry also summoned the deputy chief of mission at Japanese embassy in Seoul to deliver a formal protest. On Dokdo, South Korean officials made it clear that none of Japan's claims are acceptable. Also expressing its deep regret, Seoul's education ministry called for immediate revisions to be made to the books. Kim Hyun, Arirang News.
Now, despite having already qualified prior to the match, the South Korean national football team on Tuesday suffered a surprising 1-0 loss to the UAE in Dubai, meaning they finished second in their World Cup qualifying group, with Iran beating Lebanon 2-0 earlier in the day. South Korea needed a win to top the group. However, a 54th minute goal from the home side was enough for the UAE to pull off the victory. This means both Iran and South Korea have qualified. The draw for the World Cup finals takes place on this Friday in Doha. The tournament itself starts in late November.
And now for a look at news from around the world, we turn to Lee Seung-jae, who's standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning, Seung-jae.
Good morning to you guys.
So let's start in Peru. The South American country's president has survived an attempt to try and impeach him.
That's right, Mark. So the Peruvian president, Pedro Castillo, having survived an impeachment vote in Congress on Monday, with votes falling just short of the figure needed to oust the president, who, by the way, has only been in office for about 8 months. Now, with a total of 130 votes available in Congress, 55 lawmakers were in favor of removing Castillo from office. However, 87 votes were needed to complete the impeachment process. Now, surprisingly, in the 8 months that he's been in office, it's already the second attempt to impeach him after surviving a similar move against him late last year. Castillo has been facing accusations of graft while citing Russia's invasion of Ukraine as the reason behind the country's recent economic crisis. Now, Peru has also seen 5 presidents since 2016. In 2018, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski resigned before an impeachment vote, while Martin Vizcarra was impeached in 2020. Now, an Arab gunman shot and killed at least 5 people in Tel Aviv on Tuesday, marking the 3rd deadly attack in Israel in just a week. Now, according to authorities, the gunman was also shot dead after firing at people using an assault rifle. The latest shooting raised the number of people killed by Arab gunmen in Israel to 11 over the past week, the sharpest spike in attacks on city streets in years. While little is known about the shooter, local media say he's believed to be a Palestinian from the occupied West Bank. Now, over in China this time, a modified version of the Long March 6 carrier rocket made its maiden flight on Tuesday, successfully sending 2 satellites into orbit. Now, the rocket blasted off from the Taiyuan Satellite Launch Center and is the country's first carrier rocket type to be equipped with solid strap-on boosters. Now, one of the 2 satellites launched by the rocket will carry out scientific tests and research, including a land and resources survey, while the other will carry out tests to verify space environment detection technology. Now, the latest launch was the 412th mission of the Long March rocket series. And finally, Queen Elizabeth II was seen in public for the first time in 5 months on Tuesday as she joined the royal family and other dignitaries at the memorial service for her late husband, Prince Philip. Joining the Queen in the congregation were foreign kings and queens Friends of the late Duke, politicians including Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and military figures. Now, Prince Andrew was also seen for the first time at a public event since he made an undisclosed payment to settle a U.S. lawsuit over allegations he sexually assaulted a teenage girl decades ago. Now, Buckingham Palace did say that the 95-year-old Queen had been actively involved in the planning of the memorial service, despite limiting her duties while contracting COVID-19 earlier this year.
Good morning. Light spring rain is in the forecast. Rain will start from Jeju, spreading to southern regions around lunchtime before moving further up north. Jeju and east of Gangwon-do province could see up to 20 millimeters, while snow is expected for mountainous regions in Gangwon-do province. So temperatures will be right around the norms today, and those of us in the capital, we're having a sunny and mild morning. Highs, though, will be similar to yesterday. Busan is starting out the day at about 12 degrees Celsius, Jeju at 13 degrees. More clouds will move across the country as the morning goes on. Highs will be similar to a few notches higher this afternoon. Seoul going up to 15, Gwangju, Daegu topping out at 21 degrees this afternoon, along with decent air quality across Korea. Rain should let up by tomorrow morning, but the East Coast could see rain into Thursday afternoon, and today's wet conditions will bring cooler than average temperatures to the country. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that's all we have for now. Mark and I will be back for another episode of New Day at Arirang at 8 a.m. Korea time on Thursday. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
And I'm Mark Bream. Have a wonderful day, and thank you as always for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.